Bonjour.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you here to this roundtable devoted to mediating institutions. It's a subject we don't talk about very much. We're going to spend an hour together and wonder about whether these institutions have just been left by the wayside. They've been a bit forgotten. Some people have said that in France this is the case since Macron's first mandate. But let's not forget that these intermediary institutions have always found it hard to find where they fit in since the French Revolution, with highs and lows. And that's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. It's a tricky subject to broach, especially within just an hour. So these intermediary institutions cover all kinds of things like the chambers of commerce, the order of doctors, and all other kind of things. And because we've got several trade unions with us here, we're also going to take a look at them. These intermediary institutions which are working in business. Here I've got some participants here from left to the right. I'm going to introduce Nathalie Chusseau, who is a professor at Lille University, a member of the Cercle des Économistes, Claire Toury, who is chair of the Social, Environmental, Economic Council, Pierre Ferracci, founder of the Alpha Group, Frédéric Souillot, General Secretary of Force Ouvrière Trade Union, Christelle Thieffin, brand new president of the CFE-CGC, and Kate Moncrium, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, the Danish Confederation of Professional Associations. We're going to start by setting the scene with you, Natalie. These intermediary institutions, have they been forgotten? Well, these institutions refer to all kinds of organizations located between the state and the citizens, and they play the role of mediation, representation, and dialogue in society. Trades unions, political parties, associations, chambers of commerce, etc., professional federations also. They constitute a relay with civil society, in parallel with the traditional political representation, which is based on votes, universal suffrage. As they represent social and professional groups, they structure life, they negotiate with public authorities, they participate in social dialogue, they participate in public dialogue between citizens and the state. The problem is that these intermediary institutions have been weakened, and that's not new. It started under the French Revolution with the Le Chapelier law from the 18th century, which banned corporations. And back then, the state was rather wary of these intermediary agencies because they were seen as being a bit dodgy. These mediating institutions are not recognized either by citizens or the politicians. We see that they are weakened through the state. There are some decrees which have reformed labor law in France, reforming the way unions represent workers, and there's very little room for manoeuvre now, and very little time for social partners to reach a compromise. And the executive authorities are skirting around them because they want to consult with the citizens directly. So in France anyway, the government is launching all kinds of public consultations. So are we looking for greater democracy here? That is the question. So they are being skirted around by the citizens also, because nowadays there are other ways of defending a cause thanks to social networks. And that's what youngsters do. They have online petitions, online calls for boycotts, or there can be movements in companies without going via the trade unions. So you can have people out on the street blocking the roads, etc. And we have influencers appearing who are political influencers. So these intermediary bodies are not centralized. They increasingly want to have direct relationships with the citizens. And their legitimacy is being contested because all institutions in general are losing their reliability. the media, political parties, and trade unions are all losing legitimacy. So are they representative? This is another question. Any institution which represents only a small percentage doesn't really have much scope for bargaining. So in a context with social tension, successive crises, of different types of growth, etc., these intermediary bodies are a problem because they are essential in structuring dialogue and reinforcing democracy, developing the economy and supporting those most undermined regions. So if you reinforce them, you reinforce social cohesion. So one might wonder which platforms are used to build trust, dialogue, compromise, and a collective possibility to change society. Well, thank you very much, Nathalie Chaussot. Now I suggest we go round our panelists. Each panelist will have 3 minutes. I'm saying 3, but in fact you've got 4. So 3 to 4 minutes to present one central idea about what, for you, a mediating institution really is and what the big challenge is in your eyes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon. Thank you very much for reminding us what these mediating institutions are. When you're a bit desperate, when you get the feeling that no one's listening to you, that you're just being ignored, then the fact that you can delve into history and take a look back and say that, well, things are like this today because that's the way things have always been like in politics in France. So you can encourage yourself by saying things are moving forward. I'm not going to say whether or not we are forgotten and left by the wayside. I'm preferring to address the question of the role of these intermediary bodies, given the democratic crisis we're going through. I would mention or quote a historian and he wrote a book about the French political model, and which talks about the subject, Pierre Rosanvallon, and he says that the democratic function of an intermediary body is to say what's true, to describe reality. And that's my leitmotif for my 3.5 minutes that I've got left. So what does that mean? It means that at the CESE, where I am, every year we produce an annual report on the state of France. 2 years ago, we made our report on the question of democracy and the link with the democratic crisis and the increase in inequality. It's a very interesting report. 24% of the French do not feel represented. They do not feel as if they belong to French society. And when you ask them why, what could make things go better, they say, well, we would like to be given greater consideration. We'd like people to listen to us more. When you dig deeper, 2 years ago, it was a time where purchasing power was slightly improving. So we're saying that was the case, things were getting better. It was a trend, but if you look more closely, if you're a factory worker, or you're a youngster, or if you live on the overseas territories, or if you're a single parent, that wasn't the case. I'm giving you these examples just to highlight that dissonance between the macro approach, but it doesn't really describe reality as it's experienced out in the field. And so that's where these bodies have a role to play. And the CESE says as much. We want to document as minutely as possible what is reality, the way that people are experiencing life. Let me give you some examples. You may have read an article in the Le Monde newspaper about collecting waste in the Gironde. It was an experiment. Going to collect waste at people, or rather not going to collect your waste at people's houses, but you take your waste to a collection point. Socially speaking, it begged many questions because it's one less social service, which generated a bit of tension in the population, and then also it created inequalities because some people have a car, some people don't have a car. Those people who are handicapped or disabled, those that aren't. So it created, so it was quite a good idea, But it created a very difficult situation. And that's where we, these intermediary bodies, can step in. We have a role to play, and we come and warn the public authorities about this. Not saying, oh, watch out, you've got a rubbish idea there. No, it's to say it's a relevant idea as long as you put in these safeguards. I think my time's up. Are you waving at me to say my time is up? Almost. So saying what reality is means accepting that in a republican society, the question of equality is essential, but perhaps it's time now for us to talk more about equity, so that we can take people's lived experience into consideration, so that we can bring answers that are not necessarily macro answers, but which suit the individual's social situation, age, location, etc. I think it's very hard to do, there's no doubt about that, but I do think that that is one of the challenges if we hope to solve this democratic problem we're experiencing right now. So, Pierre Ferracci, when we were preparing this session, I asked you whether these intermediate bodies were forgotten, left by the wayside, and you said, well, there is dialogue. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I think there have been problems recently with the executive powers which have not recognized the importance of these intermediary bodies. It dates back to the revolution, of course. I agree with what I've heard so far. And there's a survey published this week which says that businesses are rather privileged in the citizens' point of view because there's professionalism, there are targets, but apart from that there's a lot which is losing credibility. The media, political systems, there are many things in France that are no longer seen in a positive hue. So the problem today of these mediating institutions is that we haven't really identified for social democracy the role that will be theirs in relation to political democracy. I've got no problem. At the end of the day, it's the population which decides, and then the politicians make the laws because they've been voted in. But some suggestions come from partners when you're talking about pensions, when they try to describe how the system should be reformed, and the politicians haven't managed to make those reforms. They failed miserably. So you need other input. But we've never really taken the time, either on the left wing or the right wing, to define, as some countries in the north have done. I think Germany have done this. It's not my be-all and end-all model, but they have defined what the role of democracy is and the role it has with state. And we can see that today on subjects such as retirement, accommodation. There's there's a whole mix of people, and you find that same mix of people in politics. Everything. Decentralization hasn't been carried out to its end, although we've made progress in Corsica in some places, but we've got no regions which are fully autonomous. So in Germany, do you feel that the different Länder are weakening the state? So I would say, to find some kind of equilibrium, the state, but also social partners, have to find a balance between their mediating institution on the one hand and the citizen's voice on the other. I've got nothing against these citizen agreements or conventions, as long as it's useful. I think we have to find a point of balance between the two. And similarly for social partners, it seems to me that the time has come to find balance between those who they represent in the business, in the sector or in the industry, and direct expression of the employees. I was talking a short while ago with Jean Auron, who was saying that one of my big disappointments in relation to the law which I introduced when I was Minister for Labour is that we did not enable the employees to speak out directly. I think the management and the trade unions and the employees would all be winners if they could actually get that communication flowing properly. I believe that would give greater weight to social democracy, and it would be easier to say to the state and other public authorities that yes, businesses can do some things really, really well. Take a look at how we're going about it. We can give you an example of balanced or democracy. So, Frédéric Souillot, can you define the intermediary bodies in a business? They are essential, absolutely key, these mediating institutions. When you're talking about instability or political instability in these mediating institutions and social partners, that means you've got stability. Because you've got stability in how you're managing situations. These mediating institutions manage more than, say, the budget. We aren't here to stand on a soapbox and tell people how things are done, but no one can give us any lessons either, because we're managing our budget very, very nicely. So create a link, an equilibrium between individual freedom and the authority of the state. If we take a look back at the Yellow Vest episode, there were no mediating institutions, no intermediary bodies, or otherwise there were 300,000 individuals representing the collective interest. And that general interest mission of a trade union, how do we give it its place back? About 90 years ago, absolutely today, the Front Populaire introduced collective bargaining in industry. That was the first time that collective bargaining was introduced. It was the trade unions, for example, to combat unfair competition and to give greater stability to the state. But today, we've talked about the 2017 decree about labour. We talk about an autonomous social agenda. And we're going to talk about that again and again soon. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about it again. To say, let's talk about a productive model. Let's look like 20 years down the line after 4 different presidents have been and gone. Particularly when you're thinking of industry and collective social protection and jobs. And we have different regions. When we're talking about simplifying and calling into question these mediating institutions, one can say that, well, let's just get rid of all of the trade unions, for example, because that it will save some money. But that's not the reality of what social democracy is. And if we want to talk about stability, I've got a very pragmatic example. The rate of participation in company elections is 3 times higher than it is in political elections. So, Christelle, Tiffin, what is your leitmotif that you want to underline? Well, for me, things are extremely clear. In a democracy, these intermediary bodies are essential, because they're essential for organizing society, they're essential for finding solutions to problems and feeding back reality from the ground. And they can solve disagreements and turn them into collective bargaining agreements. On the other hand, when these trade unions, for example, are weakened, we see that decisions are very vertical. Democracy, it doesn't have its censors anymore, and are not using useful, effective solutions which come from the ground. For an example, we've had COVID not so long ago, and last week there was that question of the heat wave we're experiencing, and we've got a state which is coming to us, the trade unions, to find solutions. And it's not just because we have better ideas than anyone else, it's because we know what is adaptable, what comes from the ground. These are not easy solutions, they're not magic solutions, but they can be adapted out in the field. They can be adapted from one sector to the next, from one profession to the next, and we can get the message across. And in this particular framework, people have trust in us. And what I would like to defend for the CFE-CGC, people don't come and contact us just when they need us, but We want to give our opinion every time there's any issue in society. So you can't just call us in when there are too many constraints. And we've noted that every time there's a kind of weakening of our position, then the state is shooting itself in the foot because it's not taking advantage of our ideas. It's not getting messages fed up from the ground and the citizens. So I feel that the state is going to encounter more problems if it sweeps these mediating institutions to one side. So I would say in a democracy, these intermediary bodies are essential. And if we're encountering more problems in a state, and the state no longer calls upon those who have resources and ideas and who can get the citizens on board, well, it's no longer a democracy. In France, when we're looking for answers, we often look towards Germany. Today we're going to look towards Kate, a different country in the north of Europe. Kate, thank you very much for being here, and well done on your excellent French we spoke earlier on. So how do things happen in Denmark? What's it like? Is it very well organized? All of the different roles well organized? Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I represent the Nordic point of view, the flexicurity point of view. And I must say that, yes, it is a sense of inspiration. But I'd like to say also, it's not merchandise that can be exported elsewhere to another country. And I'm going to tell you why. There are 4 components to our model, which are often underestimated. The first is the role of social partners. And that role is very, very clear. It is our responsibility to regulate the employment market. And state intervention is perceived as a failure. They only come in if we've failed. And that's quite unique to our model, I believe. Second, mutual trust amongst social partners. Just to give you some statistics, 80% in Denmark of the Danes trust the institutions. In France, it's only 57% that trust their institutions. So that shows the difference. And mutual trust is absolutely fundamental if you're negotiating and hope to find a sustainable, lasting solution. The third component is trade unions adapting to how the work market is, the employment market is evolving. So modernizing our strategy, our services, and then adapting to new members, and adapting to the new generation and their new needs. We have to be flexible and pragmatic if we hope to remain legitimate. The fourth component is a detail, but it's not to be forgotten. It's the gap between the revenue of the richest and the revenue of the poorest. And it's a very small gap in our country, and that's thanks to our tax system, where income tax is very high and progressive. So that's something we've got in common with you. No, not really, not really. Thank you very much, Kate. The floor will be yours again later. So we're going to open up the debate. So Claire, question for you. Do you feel that these mediating institutions really have been left by the wayside by Macron? Is it Pierre who's going to answer? Well, if we're talking about from the point of view of the employee, then no, I would say there's plenty of dialogue and negotiation in companies. So, well, we could do things better. Of course, there are some stumbling blocks, there are tensions, etc. From the point of view of the public authorities, yes, the yellow vests, represented the state's impression that they can manage everything. What I was struck when I talked about, when I was talking earlier on, is that there are very limited roles, and the employment market is mainly to do with the social markets.
Of course, the state can prevent the situation from getting worse. But if you look at the mediating institutions, there's a form of revolt. We refer to the French Revolution with the Yellow Vest movement. It had positive aspects and negative dimensions. Regarding the political authorities, both left and right, I'm very comfortable with that. We need to define the role, to define the remit, and it has to be respected. In the past, we had big trade union organizations, not the two organizations that are next to me, and they were liaising with the political powers, political authorities, with the Communist Party, for example. Today, it's no longer the case, but if you look at the political power, it's very difficult to have a controlled relationship with the mediating institutions, and they don't trust the mediating institutions for managing some problems. What is important is to be close to the field, to get a local approach. Of course, you need a labor code. Of course, we need to avoid stumbling blocks. But what is important is trust. But trust depends on the social partners. Do you think that the executive power has some distrust of the mediating institutions? Not at all. If you look at the situation, I don't want to criticize. Let's have a look at what happened in the history. On closer inspection, what is at stake here is the link between political democracy and social democracy, or civil democracy. On closer inspection, through history, political democracy turns to social democracy when things turn awry. The Social and Economic Council, the Economic Council was created back in 1925 by Léon Giraud. Why? Because social democracy had to help political democracy after the post-war, and peace had to be set in. In 1946, Bayeux speech, the General de Gaulle insisted that in the state there should be the living forces of a state with the National Resistance Council, and the program that was implemented with the mediating institutions. 2020, health crisis. Never ever have we worked so well with the state. Why? Because we were facing an urgent situation, and political democracy turned to social democracy and mediating institutions. The same applies to the war in Ukraine. After dissolution, it was the same approach. All the parties turned to us. Can you help us? We don't know how to manage this situation. How can we organize civil society? And when you enter in a more conventional approach, it doesn't work. I don't want to blame the politicians, but we have to wake up to the fact that it's very difficult to establish a link between political democracy and social democracy. And I think that we need to come up with a swift solution, because the challenges abound. Everybody should be humble, but everybody should be mobilized, and no one, however he or she is bright, will be able to settle the problems. Christelle, Frédéric, Kate told us that in Denmark, when the state steps in, it's a failure. In France, when the government wants to manage social dialogue, especially on the reform on the unemployment, or do you think that the state can manage social dialogue? I don't know if it's a will, But if you look at reliability and loyalty between the state and the mediating institutions, this is a fact in Scandinavia. That's not really the case in France, except when there's a crisis. If you look at the local services, so the different presidents of the Republic have told us that when there's a crisis, we are doing a better job than the Scandinavian countries because we have the mediating institutions, the social dialogue, and local public services. Once the crises are over, these mediating institutions boil down to a cost. So there are some measures were taken during the crisis. We did not need the state to manage the unemployment benefits. But of course, we have to assume our responsibilities, especially when we discontinue the salary expense. When there is no salary cost, management will tell us sign conventions. But since 2017, 6 reforms have been implemented regarding unemployment insurance benefits, but the state doesn't look itself in the mirror when it comes to unemployment insurance. When there's a crisis, people turn to us. I become strong, robust, but after the crisis, I represent a cost. Christelle, when there's a negotiation with the social partners and the state will say, this is the framework, this is the binding framework, and if you don't agree within a time frame that I will set, I will take the lead. Yes, that's where the shoe pinches, in fact. It's a matter of a balance between negotiations, true negotiations and loyal negotiations regarding unemployment schemes. The state will set an objective. That's quite normal. But if the state starts to define the framework, the content, the schedule, the tools, the instruments, and if at the end the state told us, I will hand over. And it was the case during the pension reform. So if there's a kind of Damocles sword above our head, if you cannot negotiate, if you cannot fulfill the objective of a state, we will backtrack. But it doesn't work. We have to negotiate a risk and we have no leeway. And we don't have anything to tap. And balance between the different participants in the negotiation is important. When we talk about mediating institutions, social partners, in negotiations we debate, we have trade union organizations and we have employers associations. For many years we had to face this Damocles sword, but the employers were not threatened. They didn't come forward, and when there was a risk, they were saying that the negotiations will fail. So we had everything to lose. So regarding this question, are we overlooked? Are we forgotten? That's not the issue. What is at stake here is to be trusted. How can we get the keys of a negotiation, and how the state can be an arbiter. So when there are some negotiations as part of a framework for the state and the citizens, government and the state will impose a framework, but a framework that is balanced and fair for all the stakeholders. In Denmark, the state doesn't intervene, doesn't chip in, and negotiations nonetheless worked. Yes, exactly. Moreover, we value independence from the government, whatever the government, left or right or center. That's why the model is very robust, and it hasn't changed for many years. This is an asset for us. In Denmark, I mean, there are some strikes. People have said that there are strikes. And when there are strikes, they last for quite a long time. Yes, exactly. there is some industrial action in Denmark. And during strikes, employers' organizations and trade unions have agreed on the fact that the state shouldn't intervene, shouldn't chip in. So this is an asset. You have the two organizations, trade union organizations and employee organizations. They have a consensus. So the government decided to increase wages for nurses, and trade unions said, no, we don't like it. Why not us? Why not the teachers? Why not the man on the street? But what is important is the consensus. We'll be talking about representativeness. So Nathalie has talked about representativeness by way of introduction. So Frédéric Souillot, Christelle Thieffin, the mediating institutions, are they less representative? Half of the workers vote for the national rally. Do you think that you represent them? So we represent the workers, and when we talk about representativeness, I will be clear to you, and at Parliament I deliver the message. I've got more members than all the political parties represented at the French Parliament, National Assembly. So, of course, there might be some laws on representativeness, but in terms of substance, I'm not somebody who is managing people's conscience. I tell the members that they have to vote. And in 2027, I won't give any voting instructions. It has been the case since 1947, when Force Ouvrière was created with Louis Jouan, the Peace Nobel Prize. We are not the conveyor belt of the Communist Party, and the members are not the conveyor belt of the parties, but you have a left DNA. What about the air conditioning? Is it from the right or from the left, the air conditioning system here? So it's hotter here. That's why it's very hot. No, if the air conditioning system was on the right, it will be cooler. It would be cooler. So workers' representation doesn't come neither from the left nor from the right. Claire has talked about the Sénat and General de Gaulle. So from the right, from the left. So Christelle, I will feel comfortable with what you've said. At CFE-CGC, we have more members than all the political parties, not more members than your organization, but if you do the maths, if you look at the different trade union organizations, there are many more members than any political party. When we talk about 8%, 10% of French people or workers who belong to a trade union, 10.3% according to DARES. This is the trade unionization rate, and less than 8% of the private workers belong to a trade union. It is not true, because they talk about all the numbers taking into account the parity model. The 8% of members, these are activists. So that's quite a lot. When you have 8 or 10% of the staff members who are people belonging to a trade union or activists. You were the prime minister. No, I was not prime minister. Somebody else was a prime minister. You are the founder of the Alpha Group. When you are facing trade unionists, do you think that they represent all the employees? Of course, they are more representative than the political parties. When you have some professional elections, turnout is quite high. The trade unionization rate is lower than the Nordic countries and Germany, because in those countries you can get access to some services that are related to trade unionism. I will highlight the role of a state in a positive manner. So the corporate trade union section didn't come from the spontaneity of the social dialogue. The health and safety commissions, didn't come from the managers, and the state plays a key role at times. The social democratic movement created this link between social democracy and democracy as a whole. Kate was right. Despite the different political parties, they abided by this scheme, this approach. So regarding representativeness, regarding the political parties, there is no match between them and us. The National Council of Resistance, you had two trade unions, CGT, CFTC. CFTC was split up, CGT was split up, FEN, the National Education Federation, was also split up. But there are 8 trade union organizations today. So that's why it's very difficult to manage social democracy. As part of the panel discussion, one of the predecessors of Frederick, he said that trade union division doesn't help, but it is French pluralism, and he might not be wrong. So that's why it's very difficult to get a strong social democracy. But amongst the managers, I'm not quite sure that they have a consistent approach commensurate with what is happening with the negotiations on pensions between employers and employees. In Germany, the social partners are very powerful. It's because they decided to take up a space that couldn't be taken by the political parties. So I think that in the 21st century, the social partners, can move, and they can be more independent of the political power. We don't agree regarding pluralism. Pluralism is an asset as CFECGC. This is the message that I would like to pass on. So in 2023, we have an inter-trade union movement. It does attest to the efficiency of the trade unions, and it shows that we are able to liaise with one another. But there's a mutual trust amongst trade union organizations, hence more transparency, and we can build up a trajectory, reliability and loyalty. So everybody agrees on political pluralism, but it shouldn't exist for representativeness and social democracy. So we're a bit schizophrenic. Kate, back to you. The unionization rate is very high in Nordic countries, above 60% in Denmark and Sweden, above 50% in Finland. How do you explain that? What is your take on that? Yes, you're right. It's true. And this figure has been stable for the past 20 years. And I can provide you with different explanations. One of which is the partners we negotiate, we draw up the working conditions and the wage levels, the wage patterns. It's not a remit of a state. It's part of our remit. This is one of the key explanations that I can give you. Moreover, there's a tradition. We like trade-offs. We like accommodations. In France, you had a revolution. We didn't have a revolution. On September the 5th, 1889, it's a law that was enacted. It was a law about the labor market, and there was a big strike, a massive strike. In the wake of this strike, the social partners signed an agreement whereby they will define the rules of the game. And what are the rules? So they agreed on the collective bargaining agreement. And during the negotiations, peace is important. Of course, you can have a strike, but during the renewal of collective agreements, collective agreements for 4 months. In France, we strike and then we negotiate. That's not true. It's a provocation. That's quite provocative, what you've said. We've got a question for Claire. So, taste for dialogue, compromise, trade-offs. Have we lost those dimensions? No, not at all. I mean, French people are very nuanced. And I think I will be talking about the Economic and Social Committee, but one of the key challenges for the generation is to combat the sense of powerlessness. Basically, you're under the impression that you are crippled, that you can't do anything, you are numbed, and this is fueled by the negative narrative and negative rhetoric. We are waging a civil war and we are hostile to everything. So that's not true. So the media will be blamed. I think that the media have some responsibility. We can talk about pluralism in the media, but that's not the topic. Every morning there's a narrative whereby French people are fighting one another, but I think that there's a mismatch between the narrative and reality. Back to the mediating institutions. The mediating institutions can build some trade-offs. I mean, this is what we do at CESE, the Economic and Social Committee, but at the start we need to accept that there might be some disagreements. So disagreements can be constructive. A conflict can be constructive upon the condition that it is well organized. I'm not an expert in trade union negotiation, but why does it work? Because it is an organized conflict. There are some fora whereby you can say yes, you can say no, this is no for this is yes for that, and we need to be able to liaise with one another. We need to build up some trade-offs, and you need to transcend your own priorities. So daily political debates are very interesting if we can talk to one another. If you think that the other party is lunatic, that's not good. You cannot make some progress, Christelle. So we need to make a difference between a conflict and disagreement. When there's a disagreement, I mean, you can negotiate. Then you have this question of trust, and conflict is different. Regarding what you've said about Denmark, I think that in France, we have a false narrative. We are not always in conflict, and the strikes are less long because we try to avoid conflicts. So these are disagreements. We can reach out to others. As part of a negotiation, you have to accept reality, and we are able to move closer to the opposing party. That's an essential point. Compromise, trade-offs mean that we need to accept the others' differences. We have differing viewpoints, and they should be accepted. In our society, we don't trust people. So you don't trust people, but you need to listen to people. So when you negotiate for some, it means that you are giving up your values. When you negotiate, you need to reach out to the opposing party. At the start, we might disagree formally or informally, but if we accept this notion of difference, that's good. An economist talked about constructive conflictuality. So we have ideological differences, but we will agree so that we can find a good balance in order to move ahead, even though all your demands haven't been accepted. Today, it's like the negotiation of the social partners. We have a state that is ruling the roost. So the Cercle des économistes. Nathalie, what can you tell us about that? So first of all, The democratic function of the mediating institution is to tell the truth, the whole truth. And in a republican society, the question of fairness is pivotal. And I think that we should be in a position to provide tailor-made answers to the age and other parameters of a society. Social democracy is not recognized because the social partners, they carry the social message. We need to find a balance between the expression of employees and what the mediating institutions represent, more weight to social democracy. And there are examples of democracies that work. So indeed, trade unions have a mission, a general mission. So collective bargaining should be back in fashion, I think. The trade unions, they have to find solutions. Disagreements should be turned into collective agreements. If the trade unions are impaired, there will be a vertical power that will be disconnected from the field. Hence, some efficient solutions can't be advocated. We are under the impression that we are turning to mediating institutions or trade unions when there's a major crisis, but they should be taken on board immediately. And these are people who regulate social matters, and they can give their opinions when there are some problems in society. So when the mediating institutions are impaired, the state would be deprived of collective intelligence. The Danish model is very interesting. It might not be exported, but the state doesn't step in the negotiations. The social partners will act, and the time is being given to trade-offs and accommodation. Trade-offs mean getting people around the table, even though they have differing views, and the objective is to find a common ground. Collective negotiation is a reality. Social dialogue works, and even though these mediating institutions are weakened, even though we would like them to have more space, social democracy works well. So we don't have too much time. A short question. I would be very brief. I'm a lawyer. I've listened to you. There's someone who is not here. There's a trade union that is not here. CGT is not invited. So that's why I have some doubts. We said that trade unions have to be independent of the state. Some trade unions, amongst which CGT, are embracing politics, moving away from their remit in order to support some candidates. So, FO, you've said that you are independent. Remember the past. So Gaston Defferre, without FO trade union organization, Gaston Defferre wouldn't have been able to get his career. So on behalf of CFE, CGC, in our bylaws, we have this question of political independence. Why? Because as part of our DNA is independence and freedom from any government. This is what is at stake here. And of course, this is a part and parcel of our DNA. Why? Because this is part and parcel of democracy. We want to be free in the negotiation process. That's why we want to be autonomous and independent. But of course, we might work with political parties. Allow me to chip in. In 1 year time, France might move away from democracy. You've talked about social democracy, political democracy. When political democracy is endangered, social democracy has to mobilize itself, and the mediating institutions will suffer quite a lot. In order to avoid this gloomy future, I will ask you, will you participate in the negotiations? I'm not a trade union leader. Of course, there should be fewer trade unions, even though the trade unions are quality trade unions. But of course, today you have some trade unions fighting the far right. CGT is not here, UNSA is not here, and other trade unions have chosen another approach to defend the values. There are different ways of combating the National Front. Then it's a matter of choice. It's a political choice. So, of course, some trade unions, they embrace politics, and others don't want to play by the rules of governments. Thanks a lot to all of you. We will leave it there. Let's call it a day. Thanks a lot for taking part in those discussions.